Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday to you all. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are so excited to have you here to share some tips and tricks to promote plant-based foods in your catering. And we thank you so much. I know caterers are the hardest working people on sets, so thank you so much for being here and taking time out of your busy day to join us. We would love to have you talk in the chat. Let us know where you're from. Let us know your name. And if you want to share your favorite plant-based meal that you have on set, we would love that. Okay, so we're going to jump right in. So my name is Steph. I use she, her pronouns. I'm with the Better Food Foundation that runs the DefaultVeg campaign. And I have 10 years of helping open up restaurants experience. And then I ran my own catering company as well. So I'm really excited to be in the company of other caterers today. And I am joined by Maggie. Do you want to say hi, Maggie?
Hi, I'm Maggie Baird. I'm the founder of Support and Feed, and I'm super excited to be here. And we'll be talking later with some amazing caterers that I have gotten to know over the years to give us some really great tips. We work in the space of addressing food equity and the climate crisis by encouraging a more plant-based and just food system. So excited to talk to you all in a bit.
And first, you're going to hear a lot from me, so bear with me. And if you have any questions throughout the entire presentation, you can drop them into the chat. Laura from Better Food Foundation is going to be moderating it, and she'll answer any questions that she can. And then later on, we'll have a Q&A after we hear from Maggie and the caterers. But in the meantime, I'm going to jump right in and talk about why we are here. So we're here today to focus on plant-based meals because meat and dairy have massive carbon footprints and impacts on our climate. You can see here that the World Resource Institute says that without changing diets, agriculture alone can produce enough emissions to surpass 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming, which is the limit that we have to prevent a global catastrophe, as you might know. So that means if every other sector, so we're talking energy, transportation, buildings, every other sector became completely carbon neutral by 2050, our food system alone can take us past the 1.5 degree Celsius of warming. And that's because food accounts for a quarter of these emissions, right? And producing animal products emits over half of the emissions from food. Further, beef and lamb products alone account for over half of our emissions from animal products. So when you put all that together, 14.5% of the global greenhouse gas emissions are a direct result of meat consumption, which is a really huge number to attribute to any one thing and when we're looking at this climate crisis. So these are just a couple other graphs to show how huge our carbon and water impact of meat and dairy products can be. Depending on our protein source, meat can be anywhere from 11 to 20 times more emission intensive than plant-based options like lentils. So on average, our greenhouse gas footprint of a plant-based meal is actually half of that of an animal-based one. And you can see here also there's a chart about which milks are most sustainable. And you can see that cow's milk drastically has much more water use and CO2 emissions than oat milk or soy milk do. So look at it one other way. Our animal agriculture system uses 77% of our farmland. It produces over half of our emissions, and it actually only accounts for 37% of our proteins. Okay, in addition to emissions, there's also finite resources that we need to consider. So land and water are big. For me, I don't know about you all, a lot of you I think are from LA. I live in LA. California and 6 other states rely solely on the Colorado River for our water. So it is literally the lifeline for 7 states in the western side of the United States. But that actually is a small percentage of the water that we're taking from the river. 70% of the water that we divert is used just for growing alfalfa for animal feed. And last year was the very first year that we denied a new residential development water rights because we just don't have enough water to go around in the Colorado River. We're drying it up. So water is a huge, huge issue, and we can massively reduce our impact by switching to plant-based diets. All right, so I'm going to show you all, this is just a chart from the Sustainable Production Alliance. It came out in 2021. The Sustainable Production Alliance is a joint effort of major US studios to work on sustainability together. And you can see, like many other reports that come out for the film and TV world in emissions, they're including categories like utilities, fuel, accommodation, and air travel. And this chart shows you it's across an average episode of 4 different TV formats, basically. But food, as usual, has been left out of the conversation here. So I actually updated this chart to include what food emissions would look like. As you can see, that's actually a pretty big emissions, especially for a 1-hour scripted drama. So those TV shows or those movies that have a larger crew, it can contribute up to 17% of our emissions, which again is quite significant. In addition to our climate impact, there are other reasons for caterers to use more plant-based diets. So 30 to 50 million Americans are actually lactose intolerant. Many religions encourage vegetarianism and restrict certain animal products. Black Americans are actually more than twice as likely to be vegan as white Americans. And 1/4 of Americans report eating less meat every year. And that is especially true in a younger population. Plant-based diets are really on the rise in our younger generations. Okay, so now I've shared with you all of the impact about plant-based diets. So you must be wondering, well, what can I do to fix this, right? What can I do to do more sustainability in my catering? So I'm going to introduce you to this concept that the Better Food Foundation runs, which is called DefaultVeg. So DefaultVeg is based on the concept of nudges or defaults that were popularized by this book Nudge a few years ago. So defaults are the option that people end up with when they're not making an active choice. So we think about this like our phone default settings or our email default settings, right? There are settings that are there already, unless if you do something to change them. And why defaults are so interesting is there's a lot of human behavioral science behind this. It's mostly because when it's seen as the norm, we all want to follow along. We want to seem accepted. We want to be part of the mass of people, right? But also it's because we're frankly very lazy people, and it takes more work to change something, right? And this is one less choice that we have to make in our busy, busy days. A classic example of the power of defaults is in organ donation. So in Germany, people are by default not organ donors, which means they have to opt in. The participation rate is only 12%. In Austria, which is just nearby and culturally similar to Germany, the opposite is true. So by default, people are organ donors and they have to opt out of being an organ donor. And their participation rate is 99 to 100%. And you can see that's not a fluke. This is true for a whole bunch of other countries. Everything on the left side of the chart is an opt-in organ donation, and everything on the right is an opt-out. So when you apply that to food, you get DefaultVeg. So DefaultVeg is a simple and inclusive strategy that makes plant-based foods the default while giving people the choice to opt into meat and dairy. And that second part of this is really, really important, okay? Because we really want to make sure that everyone still has the complete freedom of choice. I get this a lot, and I like to say, I'm not coming for your meat. We want you to have the choice. We want you to have the individual options. But what we want to do is make sustainability the default through plant-based foods. This is a study that was done in Denmark that kind of shows the concept of DefaultVeg at work. As you can see, when meat was the default and people could request a vegetarian option, on average, 94% of people stuck with the meat and only 6% requested vegetarian. But when you flip it, when you default to a vegetarian meal, on average, 87% of people stuck with the veg meal and 13% opted into meat, which in this study is an 80 percentage point increase of people adopting plant-based foods. At the Better Food Foundation, we've done some similar studies ourselves, some similar reports, and we like to use an up to 60 percentage point increase when we talk about plant-based foods being the default. All right, so this just shows your personal emissions reduction, and this is catered towards a film crew again. So there are a lot of different ways that you can reduce how we can contribute to our carbon emissions on set, right? You can you can eliminate one-time use things. You can use reusables. You could drive an electric vehicle to work. You can compost, you can reroute food waste to organizations like Everyday Action, all those things, and you can eat less meat and dairy. So if you look at the Eat Default Veg line, the green bar is actually what it would look like if we entirely eliminated meat and dairy from your diet. But eating default veg, still retaining that option, some people are choosing some meat options, it would still be a significant reduction to emissions. And I did do the math. So if default veg was implemented on a indie budget movie, so a 4-month crew or 4-month movie with a crew of 100 people, it would save up to 28.9 metric tons of CO2 emissions, which is the equivalent of 74,000 miles driven, and up to 1.5 million liters of water, which is the equivalent of 22,000 showers, which is a lot. Okay, so hopefully by now you're like, great, I wanted to implement this, but I don't know how. And I do think people really get stuck here on this part. And it's actually because it's quite easy to do. I think people expect it to be a little harder. But so I'm going to give you 5 quick tips and tricks of how you can implement this in any food service setting. Okay. So number 1, what we've been talking about this whole time is make it plant-based, right? So serve plant-based with the option to opt into meat and dairy. Instead of having a chicken Parmesan pasta, have a fresh spring greens pasta with pesto and lemon, and have the option to add on chicken and Parmesan. So this could be on a menu, this could be in your buffet that you're pulling it out and making meat and cheese the garnish, and it can also be at a set menu. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Number 2 is climate-friendly ratios. So when it's not possible to make the base meal entirely plant-based, you can create the perception that plant-based is the default by offering a minimum ratio of 2 to 1 veggie to meat options. So create an abundance of vegan options, right? If there's only one option, it stands out and it kind of makes it seem like it's just for the vegans and vegetarians. But when you have a multitude and of delicious, abundant veggie options, it just seems like it's the normal that everyone can choose from it. And there is science behind it. There was a study that said when 3/4 of the options are meat-based, only 12% of people will choose them. But when 3/4 are vegetarian, almost half will. Okay, tip number 3 is menu merger. So again, don't isolate out your vegan or your vegetarian options, actually incorporate them into the menu. And then we really recommend that the first and the last items are plant-based. Those are the ones that people are most likely to choose. And the World Resource Institute Better Buying Lab found that when you integrate plant-based through the menu, instead of relegating it to its own section, the choice goes up by 56%. People choose it more frequently. Okay, number 4, use mouthwatering labels. Call it plant forward or plant-based. Don't call it vegan. People hate the word vegan. And more than that, a really impacting strategy is to label foods with names that focus on taste or texture, where they're from, or what kind of ingredients are in there. So this is a real example of a software company that we worked with. And they had a vegetarian hummus wrap on their menu. And all they did was change it to say delicious roasted red pepper and avocado hummus wrap. And their sales went drastically up for this one item. Another way that you can think about it is like if you were at a restaurant and you saw a celiac bowl on a menu, you might not order that if you don't have celiac disease or you're not gluten-free, right? But if you saw a Thai peanut rice noodle dish on the menu, that sounds great. I would probably get that, right? The same thing's true for vegan and vegetarianism too, right? Okay, our 5th final tip is subtle substitutions. Especially on your condiments, your milks, your desserts, your breads, anything on the side, make it plant-based by default. Often this means it'll be more inclusive. People who have allergies or dietary restrictions will be able to eat them. Nowadays, the vegan products are so good, people probably won't even notice the difference. I am a chef. Like I mentioned, I ran my own catering company for a while. And I recently did one with butter, and I decided to only buy plant-based butter going forward because I can't tell the difference. And then often it's cheaper, especially if you're not using alternative meat replacements, but instead, like if you're cutting back the amount of beef that you use in a burger and adding in some mushrooms for umami flavor, it's going to reduce the cost for you. So I'm going to quickly just take you through, I laid out 3 different food service settings so you can kind of see it in action. So this is a self-service, this is a buffet. These are all the tips that I've talked about before, but just kind of laid out differently. So we have our plant-based entrees at the front of the buffet and menus. Those are definitely vegan hot dogs, and we're putting them at the front of the line. We have an abundance of salads and abundance of plant-based dishes. And then something that the World Resource Institute does recommend is including education about environmental benefits of plant-based foods. So this is different from calling attention to the fact that people are eating plant-based foods. That actually goes against it. There's something about the strategy that people aren't aware of, that it actually makes people more likely to take the food. But people do really enjoy the education, and it does help get people in the mindset of like a plant-based diet reduces this amount of water, it reduces this amount of carbon emissions, those kinds of things. This is what it would look like for an RSVP. So like I said before, default to a plant-based meal and opt in for meat and dairy. Remember our Germany versus Austria. Increase the plant-based options to your meat ratio, and then use descriptive labels. And then finally, if you have a menu, so if you have a chalkboard or a written menu for your service, integrating your plant-based options throughout the menu, putting your plant-based options first and last on the menu. And then something that we've seen really successfully is to default to oat milk in your beverages. So if you have a coffee service, or you're doing a pop-up cafe or something like that, offer oat milk in all of your beverages by default, and have people have the option to opt in to cow's milk. Okay, so again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. But I am going to kick it over to Maggie to talk a little bit about support and feed, and then have this beautiful moderated Q&A. Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you. That was amazing. I love that. Hi, everybody. So many things that Steph said resonate for me. At Support and Feed, we are asking all of our followers to take a pledge to eat at least one fully plant-based meal a day for 30 days, knowing that if 10,000 people did that today, that's 7 million gallons of water saved. So that approach of just making these subtle changes really, really super impactful. And I have the pleasure, Support and Feed has had the pleasure of being on tour with some musical artists, including my daughter, Billy, and Paramore, and soon to be many other artists. And so today I have invited 2 catering companies that we use very frequently. We use many catering companies, but these 2 are extremely good at addressing plant-based food issues. So I've invited Cody DeFreight and George Baker. Cody, let's start with you. I have a specific question for you because I've had your meals many, many, many times. And typically when I have your meals, they are on a kind of a one-day basis. You're doing a, a pop in for maybe 1 or 2 meals a day. And so what are the unique challenges when you're just suddenly invited to be there? And I will say that we generally have fully plant-based, but you can also address if you're including non-plant-based foods as well. What are the challenges of just being with a crew for one day?
That's a great question. And I think that challenge of being with a crew for only one day, or one service, as I'd call it, is the opportunity to leave that lasting impression of what we can do when it does come to plant-based meals, especially in catering, when you're touching these guests, as we'd call, for a short amount of time. And yes, this is their break. This is a time for them to rest. But when we get the opportunity to serve on multiple services, multiple days, we get to build a relationship with the crew and with the people that are there. And we've seen the return on that, especially. So yeah, I mean, really it becomes this challenge of we are striving to create this like lasting impression. And while, don't get me wrong, we're going to do our best and try very hard in that single service or that single day, we are more likely to get you back if you're going to book a little bit longer. And I think that's just like a natural human instinct to get to know somebody and to understand the food that you're eating and fall in love with it. Even if you are a meat eater and you find yourself gravitating towards these vegan options over time, you begin to trust the people serving you trust their opinion or their advice or their direction. And that's where I think those shorter services kind of like we struggle a little bit with.
Well, your food is very beautiful, and I think that real.
Yes.
I will just say, as someone who eats it at a set, it's extremely beautiful. It's abundant. It's very tasty. It's very colorful. George, you have sort of the opposite issue. I mean, sometimes you do one-offs, but I know you more as like you're on tour for months with an artist, and you're feeding a crew. In our case, a crew of 100 people 3 times a day. How do you deal with that challenge?
I think variety is key, but balancing home comforts like your grilled cheese sandwich with a local dish from the city or country that we're in, with something that they haven't tried before. Because when you're working away from home, you don't always want to walk into a local restaurant. You just kind of want a slice of pizza and to relax. So that's something that moving into a full plant-based diet has been quite challenging for both my chefs and the crew, but we've learned so much from each other. I know that the chefs will definitely say that learning how to use new ingredients and looking at all the different small print on different products has been a challenge for them. And for the crews, just more getting over the idea that what they're eating they're not going to enjoy, or it's going to sustain them for the long working day.
Well, let's go back to like a little basic of the plate. How do you, when you're thinking of a plate, and again, we talked about these great suggestions from DefaultVeg of maybe adding something on or having the meat options placed in a little bit different. But if you are composing a plant-based plate, how are you thinking of that? And you can go ahead and address the elephant in the room, which is always protein, which everyone always talks about. But in general, how are you thinking people are going to end up with their plate? Either one of you.
I think the main thing for us is texture. Quite often when I've gone to, say, another show where I'm not doing the catering or not involved, I get to the vegan vegetarian option, and it tends to be, for want of a better word, a bit sloppy, like there's no kind of depth to it. They kind of, this is probably not fair to say of all, but you get kind of fobbed off with like a lentil stew or something like that. And that's not interesting. That's not fun or fair. So to try and get like crunch and all these other elements that people get so excited about, that's the first thing to think about, as well as color and flavor, and then the protein element.
Yeah, to touch on that, like when we're catering, or I'm sure you, George, recognize this, when people are walking up to that table or where you're set up, they're eating with their eyes first. Like, what are they seeing? How is it set up? How is it presented? Is it beautiful? Maggie, you mentioned that everything we do looks very pretty, and that's by design. We are very intentional with the way things are displayed or set up, or we want people to feel like they're being treated. Like this isn't just a meal. This isn't just this like short break. This is like, oh, I'm being treated right now. I feel good. I want to go back there. I want to get more. And then, yeah, to your point, taste, texture, temperature, seasoning, like all of the above, and to the point of protein, this is always kind of the, like, if you're vegan or vegetarian, you hear it constantly, but where do you get your protein? And I mean, so many people, I think, inherently really know, we get it from everything, dark greens and from sweet potatoes and from lentils and beans, and we can go down the list, tempeh and tofu, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, taste, texture, color, vibrancy. Does it look nice? Is it pulling you in before you even know what it is? And we approach everything we do. We have a brilliant chef and brilliant cooks that really are intentional with the way they make the food look on set, before set, including the servers that set it up and get it ready. They're very intentional with how it looks and how it's presented.
I think one of you each have kind of unique approaches to the meat substitute factor. And George, I see on tour that you often have maybe the homemade kind version, but you also maybe have the more Impossible Beyond, that more traditional kind. I'm assuming that's because you're appealing to an audience sometimes that really might appreciate that. How do you both approach that homemade versus more store purchased meat substitute?
Yeah, I mean, I think personally, I think there's room for all of that meat substitute, the Beyond and the Impossible and the Not now, which is like the big new one. We offer Impossible sausage and the Just Egg for some of the breakfast items that we do, but it's not a super consistent thing. We offer it in our bakery. We offer it in our Mount Washington like walk-up window location. And those are incredibly popular. We have people that are not vegan or vegetarian or even close to that come for that on a regular basis because I think it satisfies their base urge to have this like kind of junk foody, fast foody, like it feels, it does something, maybe something from their childhood, who knows, but personally, I would lean towards more of a, quinoa and tofu and tempeh and all of those things. And I'm sure you've seen we do, on set, a lot of jackfruit, a lot of mushroom, a lot of tofu, and it's how we prepare, present it. But I think there's so much room for that stuff, especially if it's allowing or helping a client or a guest or, someone on set, on tour to feel more comfortable eating what's being served to them, then great.
How about you, George?
I think initially we used those products at the beginning of like our journey together because it was a kind of easy way for those that are a bit more reluctant to go towards a plant-based diet to see a brand that they know, they've read about it, they know that it's going to be close to meat, so they can go for it. But what we found is people started to move away from those and actually preferred some of the ones we were making ourselves in-house. So yes, initially we did rely on it quite a lot. Also, like I mentioned, my chefs at first, we were originally a vegetarian caterer. So making that leap, they also got more comfortable finding their own ways to make some of these products. So we don't rely on Just Egg and things like that, which is very key when you're traveling to countries that don't have those products. So yeah, it's funny. It's almost like the crew and the chefs we developed together moved away a bit from the Beyond, which are still great products, but I think we kind of found a happy medium together, making them ourselves.
I think they both have their place and their good uses. George, you have such an interesting thing on tour, which I think has been really effective. And again, I think it's appealing to people who are going to be with you for a long time. You have lots of really consistent but interesting stations, and the soup and the dessert and the pasta. Can you talk about that and why you integrate those and how they play into that sort of long-term feeling of home?
So live stations are really fun. People really enjoy choosing what they have in their food. They love that. They love the like interaction between the chef. Sometimes I've even had crew members jump behind and make their food themselves because it's like being back home. From our perspective, we get to interact with them. We get to see what they like, what they don't like, what they go for. And ultimately, those stations really help us cut back on waste because we're not putting food out we think they're going to go for just to not be able to reuse it and have to throw it away. So they go down so well.
Yeah, that is really interesting you bring that up because I did talk to you all about your food waste at the end of the night and where was your food going, and you said you have virtually none. And that was very impressive. Do you want to just speak a little bit about how do you manage that? And again, I think that's different than if you're doing a one-off, like just coming in for a day where it might be unpredictable who's going to eat. But since you have a kind of consistent crew, you've managed to figure that out.
So we've got a few ways of doing it. We have the ability to chill down food on a truck. Obviously, it depends on where we are in the world and how long the distance is between each city. But we don't get rid of anything. If we can repurpose it and make it into a stock, or if we can make it into a chutney, or anything we do, and we've worked out some very good and safe ways to transport this food. Again, removing the meat element means that we don't need to keep it to a ridiculously cold temperature, but quite often we'll make stocks and freeze it, and by the next city it's still in that state. We can store it and keep using it.
It's really impressive. We spoke a little bit with Steph about the cost savings or the carbon cost savings, but there is also a financial savings to this. Do either of you, have you ever found a cost savings that is consistent. And I know some companies pass that on to their clients. Some people take it as further profit. But have you noticed this in the catering world that, you know, lessening meat or not having it is a cost savings? Cody?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, you know, animal proteins are always going to be more expensive. They're going to be more, you know, to George's point, more temperamental and how you have to store and what you have to do. And, you know, all of these things that go into it. You know, I've not only ever worked at Kitchen Mouse, I've worked for many companies, and that was always a challenge. You know, we found, I could use a good example from many years ago, moving from, you know, a bag of cheese and making a house-made vegan mozzarella for a pizza company I used to run. We found that it was 25 cents on the dollar just to do it ourselves and serve a plant-based vegan mozzarella. Now, obviously, this day and age, and you know, operating restaurants and catering, food costs have skyrocketed. You know, everything has really skyrocketed. It's become really, you know, scary to operate in hospitality, food and beverage. That being said, like, yeah, I mean, you know, tofu, tempeh, things that you can make yourself outside of the labor costs. And if you factor that in, honestly, more frequently, if you have the talent or the people surrounding you that are capable of doing these things, it's going to end up costing you less. We, you know, our catering side, you know, we charge by head based on the job, and there's all these things, and it's factors of like, how far are we driving? There are all these little things that kind of go into it, but we do lean into the carbon cost side of things. You know, what is reusable, what is sustainable, what is compostable, what is paper versus plastic, and it's a constant conversation of finding the right things, the best things. You know, what's new, what can we lean on a little more heavily, and sometimes that is just going to cost us more money. And as I said, you know, operating right now, this time of year, this era that we're in, that can be a little daunting, but we still lean into it because it's, you know, for lack of a better thing, it's best for all of us.
How about you, George? Anything?
Well, we move around quite a lot, so it's hard for us to like relate in one day, because in one day we'll be in Asia where we can't buy certain things because they're so expensive, and even across America it's very different. So we try to buy as locally as possible. We do a lot of work before we get to a city to see what the local dishes are, to see where the nearest markets are, what we can actually get, and try our best to lean in that way whilst also taking care of, you know, what everybody needs. And then looking forward, we try and stock up. So if we go to a part of the world where we can get some great spices, we'll stock up ahead of time. That's a way that we try and keep things down, because sometimes if you're in a certain country trying to put a burger on, it can end up being very expensive.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of blown away by what you all do, because we get to a city and you're out all shopping at the local markets. And I know you also make it really fun and exciting. And I think we have a picture right now on a screen of a beautiful dessert. And that leads me to think about the subtle substitutions that Steph was talking about. You know, there's so many foods that people eat who are not plant-based, but that can being plant-based with no one noticing. Dessert being top of the list, in my opinion. No reason a dessert can't be plant-based. But what are some of those other substitutions that you think are just no-brainers, like just automatically make, you know, whatever your catering is, that can be plant-based?
I think we've done a lot with mushrooms. Chicken of the woods being one. I've genuinely had people blown away by the fact that it's not chicken, the texture that you can get from it, and not even necessarily just frying it. You can do so much with it. And I'm sure Cody knows the banana blossom with the fish and chips. Like, that one's a big go-to as well.
It really is. Banana blossom is such an incredible thing to work with, right? I briefly worked for Upton's Naturals in Chicago during the pandemic, and one of the things they're very well known for is their banana blossom. And we did, me being from the West Coast and not being from a Midwest, very Catholic heavy city, you know, we did I'm trying to remember. I apologize for not knowing anything, but we did fish fry in Chicago with banana blossom, and it was so intriguing to people that Eater came out to cover it, and it was this really interesting, kind of funny thing that for us was just so like, well, yeah, we're all vegan, like this is what we're gonna make and serve, and it was very delicious. But to have media come out to be like, whoa, this is crazy, and it's not really. They're eating it and they're trying it and they're loving it and playing with banana blossoms. But to your point, mushrooms are incredible. I mean, the things that you can accomplish with a beautiful mushroom is insane. I mean, carne asada, like fried chicken, you go down the list and people are always blown away.
I think that as a very long time person in this space, the things that I would request from people if they're on the default veg mode is, always the soups, the chilies, the salad dressings, the salads, the dishes where they would someone might throw in chicken stock. Don't use veggie stock, so someone might throw in cheese, put it on the side, anything that could be, sort of without really a thought. And I think you all are so deep in it, you probably almost don't even remember, like vegan mayonnaise, those little things that sort of sabotage and also just, make it not possible to get that sort of carbon savings. So those are so helpful. And that plant-based milk substitute. I've also noticed that some of you have a lot of treats. And I think especially for these long time catering sessions, when you're with a company for a while, crew really are looking for those treats. And I think like George, you have a juicing station, some other kind of things. How do you think about that?
I think it's just seeing what they're going to need. Like the juicing station comes about from trying to help people get protein, just to because we have to kind of introduce them to new ways of getting it. So having protein powders in a juice station is a great way for those that are reluctant to go, this is protein, it says it's protein, I'm gonna eat it and enjoy it. And then gradually they kind of trust us more with the food that we're making and get more kind of exploratory and realize you don't need to focus on that. But that's where that kind of thing comes from, just thinking about the things that you want at home.
Yeah, making people feel at home. Like I know on tour with you, I feel like if you wanted to get up and have a peanut butter sandwich, there it is. If you have all your beautiful catering, but there's also the option to go make your favorite home thing and being able to juice and special. And Cody, you have a lot of those sort of, I don't know, feeling like home and treats. And, certainly a lot of those are desserts, but they're just very comforting items that you have on your table.
Yeah, I mean, I think that speaks to, our founder, Erica, and her vision for what we do. Everything feels so comforting and feels very home. These little mini cookies we make, these cannoli nut cookies, these peanut butter and jelly thumbprint cookies that feel homemade, but they're vegan, they're gluten-free. I mean, compared to another cookie, there's still, some of them have no sugar, actually. A lot of our cookies, made with maple versus sugar. So relatively healthy for you as well. But when you have that cookie, you have that salty chocolate chip cookie, or you have that chocolate croissant that is, I know for a fact that I convinced a Michelin star chef, to reconsider how they do their croissants up in Healdsburg, just based on eating croissants in our bakery. That this can be the not a catalyst, but it finishes off everybody's meal of their day with such a nice little treat. And when it's plant-based and it's easy and they're surprised, that's kind of great. I love, we don't put vegan on anything really. Like it's not a moniker that we use. I ran Donut Friend and we did the same thing at Donut Friend. We didn't put vegan on a thing. Everything is it's just donuts. Here it's delicious pastries. It doesn't, if you ask, we can tell you, yeah, that's gluten-free, but we're not going out of our way. They're just saying, yeah, this is a delicious little cake. This is a delicious brownie. This is a fudgy brownie instead of a walnut flour gluten-free brownie. And people just eat it, love it, ask about it, and then they're, oh my gosh, that's so amazing. And then they come back.
Well, I think we're sort of out of time, but I could talk to you all day because I could talk about food all day. So that's the end of our section. Thank you so much, Cody and George.
Thank you.
Really appreciate
Thank
you.
you.
Really appreciate your model. George, again, your company is Eat Your Hearts Out. Yes?
Yes, that's right.
And Cody, you're currently at Kitchen Mouse. So thank you so much for joining us.
I love
Thank you
the
very much.
application of default veg strategies too in these answers. So, but yeah, we're coming up on the end of our webinar time. So I just wanted to put this up so you all can stay in touch with Support and Feed and the Better Food Foundation. I'm going to drop my email into the chat. If you are a caterer who is going to implement some of these strategies, I would love to hear from you. We get asked all the time for caterer recommendations. And I have an email literally to A24, a distribution company right now that is generating caterer lists. So if you are implementing some default veg strategies and encouraging plant-based diet adoption, I would love to hear from you and include you on that list. Maggie, I don't know if you want to plug anything for Support and Feed.
Well, Support and Feed is very happy to work with anyone in any kind of performance venue, just to even provide some signage, provide educational materials if you like them. You know, maybe a crew wants to take a pledge to eat at least one plant-based meal a day. If we can provide any information into it in addition, or if your company would like to feed people in the city that you're working in, that could be us. We feed people at amazing community orgs that may be impacted by movie or music production, and give back to the community with a community offset portion. So let us know if we can help you with that. But thank you for joining us, and thank you for being willing to default to vegan. We'll not call it vegan, default to veg.